Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire. Hi, Youth Worker Nation. This is Doug Edwards with Youth Worker on Fire, and today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Blake Appleby, I should say, Youth Pastor or Pastor Blake Appleby. And we're going to talk with him and about him in just a few minutes. I want to say thank you so much to all my crew here at Eustis High School, not my crew, but Mr. Ligler's crew that I get to borrow on a regular basis. Thank you, David and Gabby and Bear, and got the new guys coming up with Matthew Colby, and I know there's another guy, and he'll kill me for that, but we'll figure out his name later. So anyway, those guys, thanks for being here and doing all this stuff, and Mr. Ligler for being inviting. Also, listen, we're looking for sponsors for Youth Worker on Fire so that we can keep this going, and so you can reach me at 352-516-6675. Text or call 352-516-6675 and youthworkeronfire@gmail.com. So today we are here with Blake Appleby, and Blake's from Jacksonville. Originally grew up in that area and married his wonderful, beautiful wife, Meredith, who we tried to get here today, but something about teaching school, being a professional, I don't know, she couldn't make it. And so we'll do that another time. Meredith, you're on. It's just going to be me and you. We'll talk about him, and more importantly, we'll talk about you, okay?
Yes.
And then they got two children. They got Micah and Wade.
Yes,
Wade. Wade's the youngest?
Wade is the youngest.
Yeah,
He's
okay.
1 year old.
1 year old, so 3 and 1.
Yes, sir.
That's incredible. And you've been in student ministry since 2010.
Yes, sir.
You came to First Baptist Umatilla at 2012.
Right.
And you're still there. No one's killed you. No one's thrown you out. It's really awesome. So catch us up to date. I gave a little bit of your background there, a little bit of who you are. Tell us about you and your family.
All right. Well, my name is Blake Appleby. My wife, her name is Meredith, and she is the best thing about me. She is.
I'll agree with that.
Yes. I mean, behind every youth pastor is a wonderful woman,
mm-hmm.
and
or a wonderful man if they're a lady youth pastor.
Yes.
You know how that goes.
Yes,
all right,
true.
man. I got you out of trouble. You're almost
Very
in trouble.
true.
Go ahead.
Wonderful wife. 2 sons. Micah, he's 3, and Wade, he is 1. And our house right now is what I would call a beautiful disaster. It is a wonderful thing. It is a messy monster, if you will, but it just shows signs of life, and I love it. I love it.
That's good. That's good. And let me tell you what, absolutely. I have 2 sons. Mm-hmm. They're all in their 20s now, and my youngest is a daughter. She's also 20. The others are, in fact, Ryan's in Italy right now with his wife. Right. Just some cool stuff that had happened there. And then my other son's over in DeLand. So I get when they start where you are right now, it's messy. And Mama Meredith, she is amazing, I'm sure.
Yes.
She keeps you afloat because she keeps the order of the ship that is floating there at your house. And those guys, it's okay to be. By the way, if anybody comes over from your church or whatever and says, you need to clean up this, just say, Doug Edwards has been around for a long time. He said no. Just keep it dirty. Let it do it the way it is. Let it be cluttery. Guys got to grow and learn, and they're boys.
Right.
They're boys.
That's true.
Right?
That's very true.
Tell me a little bit about this, though. You've given me a bit about your family there. Tell me how young you were when you knew that you were going to go into some kind of ministry.
Okay. During the summer of 2005, I was a 16-year-old, and on a Thursday night, I was saved. Jesus saved me. I mean, hit a moving target. I knew so much about Jesus, knew so much about church life. My parents were in ministry, and it's one of the greatest lessons I've learned is that Jesus will chase you, and he will hit a moving target. And on that Thursday night, I got saved, and on a Friday night, the craziest week of my entire life, I knew that God was calling me to be a student pastor. I knew that because I knew that as a teenager, I wanted other teenagers to experience what I experienced and who I know. So I wanted my friends in high school to know Jesus. I wanted my friends to experience the love that I'm experiencing from the Lord. And then I knew that was not just going to be in that season of my life, but I knew like I wanted to invest and just pour my life into other teenagers, really just to see a replay of redemption. That's what I call it. I want to see what God did in my life happen and in other 16-year-olds' lives and other 15 and so on. So.
Yes, that's a pretty awesome thing there. And you're how old now?
I'm 28.
Oh, 28. You're almost too old.
I know.
That's not true. That's not true. My
right.
trainer, Jack Hamilton, when I was in my 20s, and I came into Youth for Christ because I was a musician. I really didn't want to do student ministry. Didn't even see it in my future at all. But ended up with Youth for Christ and in Orlando. And Jack Hamilton was Billy Graham's first hired youth worker for his crusades, that sort of thing. And he was my trainer. Jack was in his 70s when he was training me.
Wow.
And so there is no age limit.
That's right.
Doug Fields will tell you about that too. His best volunteer was 70 years old.
Wow.
And he tried to recruit him. He wouldn't come for him. He sent two snotty-nosed ninth graders, he said. He said, here I am with my master's degree. And these little girls came up to him and said, would you volunteer for us? And he says, yes. Wow. Yes, I will. And so age is really not the deal there. But let's talk about where you are right now. You have 7 years, 5 years, excuse me, with First Baptist Umatilla. Right. You're at
Briceville, Florida,
which is right outside of Jacksonville. Before that, what were those 2 years like?
Those first 2 years were, I would say, it was me realizing that what you learn in a classroom isn't always going to fit the context of the church. That you can know a lot of information. You can know a lot of how-tos, but it's going to take practicality. It's going to take God working in and through you to be successful in that environment. And it's just more than information. It's more than education. Those are good things. But I learned the hard way that just because it's in a book or just because an expert said, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work in the context that I'm in. So I had to really find out who I was in Christ the hard way. I had to find out that God's created me for a purpose and He's put me in a unique place, which means I can't try to be anybody else and I can't try to do what maybe my favorite preacher's doing. I have to do what's going to fit this context. I learned that the hard way.
Yeah. I mean, most of us do, but Youth Worker Nation, here's the deal. If you are just now in student ministry or teaching in school or coaching or whatever, that's what we're here for, to say you don't have to always have that kind of learning curve. Learn from our mistakes, learn from the hardships that we've had. That's a lot easier learning than trying to do it on your own and going, I learned things best the hard way. Well, I do too, and it's not a good way, okay? It's a very painful way. And so if you can learn something from this. So what was your education background?
Trinity Baptist College. It's a small Bible college in Jacksonville, Florida. Just a shameless plug for them.
Yeah, there you go.
Love that school. Go back several times a year to speak in their chapels. But received an AA from that school and then finished out with Liberty University online.
Okay.
And that wasn't my original intention, but because I got brought on staff while I was being educated in a college, I had to finish out online. I just couldn't continue to go back and forth and meet the expectations that they had for me.
Each of us do things differently, learn differently. Some guys go on to seminary and they get some more education there. I did not do that. I was educated by Campus Life, Youth for Christ. You went to a Bible college. And by the way, how good you are or how bad you are does not equal how educated you are.
That's right.
It would be great if it did. That way we could easily define and find out who's who, right? But it does not necessarily mean that. So you learn some things when you're, and I tell people this in student ministry, the same thing happens in the teaching profession because I'm almost, this is embarrassing, but at the same time I tell people, because it really was the right thing for me. I'm almost certified in 3 states to teach in the public school system. Hey. but it wasn't something I wanted to do. It just seemed like things kept leaning themselves that way. But the things that I really wanted to do seemed like they would come up as soon as I'd finished student teaching in each state. Would do something else. And I saw that with teachers, that it really takes that first year, 2, maybe 5 some cases for them to really catch hold of, oh, okay, I've got a rhythm now.
Right.
This is what works, this is what doesn't work, this is what I should do. And you're always learning that.
Yes.
Always learning that. So tell us about when you got to First Baptist Umatilla. What did you do differently than those first 2 years?
To be honest with you, the first, I would say, I can be very, very stubborn, and God had to work on me. But the first year, I was trying to do what I did at my previous church. And it all goes back to context, that even though Jacksonville and Umatilla are only 2.5 hours away from each other, it's a different world.
Yeah.
And the students are different, their names and their needs are different. Of course, you keep the gospel the main thing, the message of Jesus the main thing, but the methods are going to be different. And my first several months at First Baptist Church of Umatilla, I was just trying to do everything that I did at the last church. From the order of everything, from the events, everything that was in the past I was trying to do in the present, and it didn't work. It didn't work. And if
How frustrating was that?
Very frustrating. It was very frustrating. I was wondering why in the world, I wasn't seeing the response that I'd seen in the past, or why I wasn't seeing, certain environments look the same. Well, this is what we did, and this is what happened in the past, but this is what we're doing now. It's the same thing, and we're not seeing any change. And I had to learn the context of Umatilla. I had to learn the culture of Umatilla. It wasn't Bryceville anymore. This ain't Kansas anymore.
This ain't Kansas anymore. I know, right?
You had to learn that culture, and had to learn that this is a different world. It's a different world. It's a great and wonderful place to be, but I think as a leader, you got to use your senses before you use your voice. You've got to engage your mind and your ears before you just try to do what you've always done. And I learned that the hard way.
When did that light bulb come on? The reality that you've got to change.
I would say it took just me finally. I don't know if it was like some bright and shining moment, like when a light bulb came on, but it was just through conversations with students where literally they would be saying, Blake, I don't understand one word that's coming out of your mouth. Like, I don't get this. I don't get what you're saying. So I had to learn, not that it wasn't compromised at all, but just, man, we got to take a few steps back so we can move forward. And I had to really just not teach like someone who's gone through an educational system, someone who's gone through Bible college and Liberty University. I couldn't teach that way. I couldn't bring a classroom to the church. And I had to realize, what do they know, which meant I had to build relationships. What don't they know, and how can we explain this in a way that they can know? And that took a lot of time. And once that light bulb came on, if you will, once that I realized that it wasn't degrading them, it's not a complaint about them, but I realized that they were not where I thought they were. And which means I had to do what I never thought about doing. It was simplifying everything.
Yes.
Almost to where you feel silly, because you're like, man, like,
you're talking to people on Mars when you are from planet Earth.
That's absolutely it.
Right. And Youth Worker Nation, let me tell you about this. The couple things. Jacksonville, Florida, used to be number 2 largest square mile city in the world.
Yes, sir.
Total different world, military town, naval base, that whole bit. And so Umatilla, even in Lake County, is like another world within even this Lake County world. A small mega church, I say small mega church, a church, is growing almost to mega. They're a little over 1,500, 2,000, something like that.
Yes, sir.
In a place that most churches haven't seen more than 200.
Right.
And it's because phenomenal things happen there. You've got around 130 in your youth ministry. Let me translate that. If we're doing that in a larger area, that 130 probably look like about 330, 400 people. Right. And so, it's about the same equivalency because, and you're dealing with these things. I know this area and I know large cities. Mm-hmm. I was in Denver, Colorado, getting some training with a guy by the name of Jim Burns. And Jim Burns was the first guy that wrote a sex and dating book in student ministry, period.
Wow.
And he was
pioneer.
Doug Fields. You've heard of Doug Fields.
Right.
Is his youth pastor and his mentor.
Wow.
And so Jim, I got to spend 2 weeks with him out in Colorado with a group of guys and took us through wilderness training, all that. And out there, now I'd been to California through training. I'm a North Carolina boy. I've seen all these different sort of things. But when I was there and I would say certain things, being from Florida, sometimes they would chuckle and they go, it's not that way everywhere. Why are you thinking this whole context is this way everywhere? Just because you're successful where you are does not mean you're going to be successful everywhere else.
That's good.
And that's
so
something?
True.
And by the way, and Doug Fields would say about you, he'd say it's the percentage. By the way, he said, percentage-wise, he said our church was at around 40,000 at that point when I was out at Saddleback, looking at his training and or his youth ministry, and he ended up having a training with Jim Burns that week. That's why I went out for us guys. And so he said, let me tell you what, percentage-wise, he said, it's about 20% is about what happens, whatever size the church as a whole, adult-wise is, family-wise or whatever, is around 20% is about the max you'll ever grow.
Wow.
Unless you're certain guys like Bill Hybels, which his church was 250 and his youth group was 500.
Right.
Now he's got one of the largest churches in the world. Wow. So certain people are gifted that way. But what you're doing is massive in the area that you're in. I want you to know, if you didn't know that, I know that. Wow. In that context, you guys that are in Youth Worker Nation, if you're in rural and smaller communities, that's what makes up most of our church population throughout the United States, not the mega churches.
That's right.
And so give us a little more context. Tell us some things that you saw in your students once you started speaking in a way that they understood.
Right. Well, one thing is they started asking questions, and it wasn't like it was questions that were based upon their understanding, if that makes sense. They were capable of understanding what was being taught. They were capable of really just having meaningful conversations after a message. And once they started asking questions, I would say it unleashed a movement, because they started understanding the scripture, they started understanding the Bible, and they started realizing that it's not just information. Like, this is not just information, but it will transform you, it will direct you and lead you. And that's when we really started seeing a lot of change. It wasn't when we changed our set design, it wasn't when we put some lighting in our facility, which we did, and grateful for that, but things changed when students started understanding scripture on their level. That's really, they started asking questions, like questions that I didn't even think of. I was very impressed.
We say things differently in Orlando than we do in Zimbabwe.
Yes, we do.
We say things differently in India than we do in New York City.
Yes, we do.
And so why wouldn't it be the same with our different cities and our different towns? Mm-hmm. So that is a huge insight for people. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is for. This is for guys just like you, yes, guys that have been in for a long time and are just kind of tired and burned out, but especially for those guys that are in their first year or getting ready to even think about whether they're going to do this on a volunteer level. My youth pastors were volunteers, and they were abused horribly by their church, and they sacrificed greatly. So many of us came out of that. Blake, give me your worst ministry moment.
Worst ministry moment, there are several. I never try to portray myself as perfect, but if there's one that I think can relate to a lot of youth pastors wanting to be real intentional about this, it was when I was misunderstood by a parent. Mm-hmm. And just honestly, they had heard something and it was not true, not just trying to defend myself, but the trueness of this situation was what I was accused of and what I was told that I said was clearly not what I said. And, whenever you're caught off guard, usually you have a tendency to react in a way that is unfamiliar. Like you start seeing, whoa, that's not me. Like I don't want to talk that way. I don't want to act that way. But this parent, I was cornered, which is one of the first problems. I felt like I couldn't get out of the space I was in. And they were accusing me of saying something, and I fired right back at them. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I found myself saying things that were hurtful. The tone I mean, that's why as youth pastors, you need to own your tone in every conversation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because your
Very
tone
difficult.
says a lot. And I was saying things, defending myself and defending my wife, and it just was not pretty. Like, fire never puts out fire. And that's one thing that I learned through that situation. That relationship's restored. It's amazing. We actually have a great friendship now. Their students are graduated. But it was a moment when I just completely made a fool of myself. And the hardest part for me, even sharing the story, which I totally debated on the way here, the hardest part for me was I only had one son at the time, but he was standing right there.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
my thought was, I don't want my son to see that this is how I speak to parents or people in general.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the hardest moments for me. I had to learn from that process. I think it all came back to I took myself way too serious, and I was trying to prove something when I had absolutely nothing to prove.
Mm-hmm.
And just made a fool of myself with my mouth, because God uses the things that I say. He uses my mouth, and that's what the enemy will attack in my life the quickest.
Oh, yeah.
And,
absolutely.
It's hard. It's what James says, does fresh water and salt water come from the same location?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
But in that moment, things were salty, if I could say that.
Mm-hmm.
Things got salty,
mm-hmm.
and it was embarrassing, and I was ashamed of the things that I said. But that was a ministry mess, if I could put it that way.
Well, and let me tell you what, I'm glad you shared that, because guaranteed the people listening here they've either already done it, or they're going to do it.
Right, that's right.
And I'll tell you what, one thing is, if you're too tired, I don't know if you're tired that day, but let me tell you what, I was tired one time, and I just blew when a parent approached me like that. And I write about that in one of my books. And so the reason I put that out there is because get your rest.
That's right.
You're not invincible, and we think we are, especially in church world and in Jesus world. Let me tell you what, Jesus got away for rest.
That's the truth.
He was in tough situations, and these guys were going, we're gung ho, let's do it. And he'd say, no, let's get away for a while. And they go, what? And he was going, you got to get your brain together, guys. You're too tired. You have no idea yet, but you're too tired. Let's go.
That's so true. That's so true.
That's right. And so, guys, get your rest. Get your 8 hours a night. You say, well, I don't need that. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. If you hadn't done 70-hour weeks, 80-hour weeks, you're going to. Right. If you haven't, most probably you've done some 3-day, 4-day weekends. You get an hour sleep a night, maybe.
Right.
And I remember
especially
being up for. Yeah. And what was your worst moment in life?
Worst moment in life was for sure my first year of Bible college. I barely passed high school. My SAT was horrible. I entered Bible college on academic probation, so I entered a mess. And I knew I was called. I knew God was like, look, you're gonna reach students. You're gonna be a youth pastor. I went through a speech class, and that was one of the first classes I ever took, and I gave a speech, and to be honest with you, I prepared really hard, and I thought it was really awesome. And the teacher met me after class, and she's like, Blake, what has God called you to do? Mm-hmm. And I was like, to be a pastor, to tell teenagers about Jesus. And very clearly, she told me, Blake, part of pastoring is communicating. Mm-hmm. And you can't do that. You can't do that. So it was in that season. I mean, it was a very difficult season, because if I'm honest with you right now, I was doubting the call of God on my life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And my dad was very involved in this situation with me, just saying, look, you have to remember that the God who called you is the God who's going to lead you, is the God who's going to establish you. He is the one. If he's called you, you're going to see that calling. And reminded me of a story of Gideon when he was in a wine press, and just so many different things when he felt like a wimp in a wine press, and God called him a mighty warrior. It's just those moments. It was this dark moment for me, a very dark moment. Sometimes pastors don't want to talk about this,
right?
But very, very depressed, very much dealing with real anxiety, worried. So many things that God has freed us from in salvation, but if we're not careful, we can be entangled in.
Yeah.
And that was a very difficult season in my life. Very difficult. Doubted the call, wanted to walk away from college. I mean, literally was considering real estate. I was like, man, I could probably...
We've all considered real estate.
I was like, that seems like a
Doug
pretty
Field
easy...
says, he said, I've been at McDonald's before, and I thought, I could rock that cash register. I could do
Yes.
that, right? Get out of this, right?
You start thinking in a way that
Right.
you've just never thought before. But that was a difficult season. My brother went through a very scary time health-wise. Shortly after that, my dad went through a health scare. And that year was just the first year of Bible college. It was hard.
Yeah, whatever can happen will happen. You're never prepared. You got to be prepared to be surprised.
That's right. That's so true.
And so we're gonna go to a lighter area now. That is your best ministry moment.
I'll say this. This is the best ministry moment for me. It's when a student they're not coming to you talking about what they're doing. Like, man, I'm doing what you've been preaching. I'm doing what you've been saying. It's not when they come to you telling you what they're doing. It's when you actually see that they're doing what has been taught. They're doing what God's word says.
Give me a specific.
Brian Buckner is the first name that comes to mind. There's two. This conversation right now is going to be a little twofold of my favorite ministry moment. One was I saw God really, really. I mean, he set Brian on fire. I mean, the guy it wasn't just information, it was true transformation. I mean, as a youth pastor, I was like, there's hope for me. This is a student who is living for Jesus. Brian was one, I mean, he was the biggest blessing to me to date in ministry, just because I watched him put one foot in front of the other when it came to his faith. And the reason why I said it's twofold is because he's in Bible college right now. And if there's anything as a youth pastor who gets tired, as a youth pastor who gets exhausted, as a youth pastor who when he lays his head on his pillow, he knows he's been faithful, but just wonders, man, did that get across? Like, it's moments like that when we doubt and we're insecure and we're wondering what in the world we're even doing with our lives, that we see God working in a student.
Yeah.
And Brian Buckner and several other people that have gone through our student ministry, even guys that are in our ministry right now, it's just seeing them put one foot in front of the other and walk in the calling that God has put on their life. That's the biggest blessing for me, man. It's not how many people show up on Wednesday. It's not how many activities we do. It's watching students become disciples who walk with Jesus. I tell our students all the time, we're not here to build an audience, we're here to raise an army. And I tell you what, when I see a soldier, if you will, when I see a young man or young woman who's walking with Jesus, that's a blessing, man. It's not a paycheck. It's not being able to do great interviews like this. It is just seeing people really just live in the calling that God has on their life. That's
it's a big deal. And by the way, 5 years is usually when you first hear it.
That's right.
5 years after your ministry starts at about 5 years.
That's right.
You can say that about teaching, coaching, other things too, but we know in student ministry, most people don't last 2 years.
Can I throw one comment
go ahead.
on that? Just want to say, because I know there's a lot of youth pastors listening to this, and your first 2 years, I would say, are going to be your hardest years. Even though people call that like the that sweet stage, whenever people are just getting to know you and you're getting to know them. I believe that a lot of youth pastors, they back up and they pack up. They leave the ministry in that 2 year time frame because they don't see what they want to see.
Right. They want it overnight. They want
to see the harvest when they haven't even put a seed in the ground.
Right.
And what I want to encourage you to do, and I mean this with my entire heart, I feel like this might even be the reason why I'm even here right now, is you've got to stick with the church. You've got to stay with the church. Don't leave when it gets hard. Don't leave when it gets difficult. Don't leave when you disagree with some minute things.
Okay.
But man, stay with it. Stay in that church. Love those students through it all. I mean, that's my encouragement to you. Those first 2 years are going to be real difficult, but that seed, you'll start seeing the harvest, if you will. That 5 year mark, exactly what you said.
We just got a couple of minutes, and so Youth Worker Nation, Doug Fields, your first 2 years in youth ministry book. Go to that. Go find that one. Your first 2 years. If you could go anywhere in the world with Meredith, no ministry. This is about you and her. Where would you go?
Grand Cayman.
At Grand Cayman.
Yeah,
How long
Grand
would you
Cayman.
stay?
I would stay as long as I could afford to stay there.
Have y'all been before?
Yes, we have.
You have?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
That is where we would go. That is where we went there on our honeymoon. And
tell us what Grand Cayman is like. Give us, draw a
Grand
picture.
Cayman is
a picture.
Beautiful beaches. I mean, just it's beautiful. I'm not really a Coke drinker. I'm not really, don't really like Coke, but Coke there is a whole lot better than Coke in America.
Yeah.
There's just so many things about the Grand Caymans that's beautiful. It's relaxing. My wife is more of a beach person, and I'm more of a mountain person. It shows our personalities. She's extroverted. I'm introverted. I like the tranquility of the mountains. She likes the craziness of a beach. And Grand Cayman actually kind of provides both. Like it actually,
that's why she's a middle school teacher, by the way.
That's absolutely why she's a middle school teacher.
Special person.
Right. But it provides both. It's beautiful, it's relaxing, it's peaceful, and I would go there today if I could.
That's great. We got to close out. Youth Worker Nation, thanks for being with us. And here with Blake Appleby. How can they get in touch with you, Blake?
I'll give you my phone number. You can call me anytime, 904-962-3608, blakeappleby.org, and you can find more information there. And
he's on YouTube. I saw him a couple of things, old ones, but they're there. All right. Youth Worker Nation, we're out. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.